I can go. Yeah. All right, what was that? All right, well, good morning. I'm State Senator J.D. Ellis, Senate Chair of the Clean Energy Caucus. Very proud to co-chair with Representative Steve Owens. And thanks so much for coming and obviously with Joint Rule 10 just happening a couple of weeks ago, very timely briefing, not just on some of the bills that have been filed around solar siting, but really the overall state of solar in Massachusetts. I think there's, in some ways, a lot to be proud of in Massachusetts about being one of the leaders in the nation on building solar. But I think what we're finding is more and more challenges to build on buildings, on disturbed lands, but also a lot of questions around incentives, financial incentives. And I think also just the discussion about the some major bills around solar, so what we can do in the climate legislation. The legislature will take up the session. I think that's one of the things that's I'm proud about with this caucus and sort of the legislature in general is that we, I do believe strongly we will pass the climate bill. So we want to make sure that it has some strong solar initiatives and legislation in it. And of course, ones that are private file at least one of the bills for solar incentives. So very happy to have Sierra Club's political director, Jess, Nahigian, to be here, and I'll open up to Owens to say a few remarks.
Great. I just want to say thank you all for coming today. If we're going to meet our 2030, 2040, 2050 climate goals, solar is going to need to be a part of that. Solar storage. Wind, we offshore wind, we set into motion, we set some roadblocks. Our job is to remove some of those roadblocks and make it easier, to make it easier and provide more incentives for folks to put solar up on disturbed lands or forever, where we can get that energy from the sun, that free energy from the sun. There was just, I don't know if you read the article about the comments to the DPU about how expensive energy is. Can't be free. So if we can get it from the sun or from the wind, that will eventually help our energy prices. So I'm really excited to announce that we have today Jess Nahigian, as Sarah said, political director for Sierra Club. And more importantly, one of my constituents in Cambridge, and who I share the primary map state committee. So Jess is a great friend. Really glad to have her here today to talk to us about. So Jess.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm going to talk, a little bit about a specific bill that Sierra Club has got up, but I'm also going to kind of give a broader overview of sort of the state of solar in Massachusetts in general. So the bill that specifically that I'll be talking about is S2150, which is specifically about solar on public land. So just very briefly, they said. Like political director for Sierra Club. Sierra Club is the country's largest grassroots environmental organization. We have over 80,000 members and supporters here in the Commonwealth. Our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. As Rep. Owens and Senator Eldridge eloquently put it, we have a lot to be proud of in terms of solar in Massachusetts. And I can actually, why don't I stand? The presentation. That would probably be a good idea. So we have a lot to be proud of, and we still have a long ways to go. So we've begun to build a solar industry here. The governor in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan has said we have a goal of 10 gigawatts of solar energy by 2030. To give you a sense, we're currently at 4.1 gigawatts. And so we need to significantly ramp up the amount of solar energy that we're producing here in Massachusetts. I'll return to this graphic in a sec. And so, like Senator Eldridge said, There is a lot of free market economics around solar, but solar incentives and our incentives programs really strongly shape the type of solar that gets built and the speed with which solar is deployed. And so I wanted to briefly just give an overview of like the incentive programs that we currently have incentivizing solar in Massachusetts. So first of all, we have federal and state tax credits. That's for the actual installation, the sort of capital cost of the solar project itself. In Massachusetts, I believe our tax credit is 15% up to $1,000. 50% of the cost of the system up to $1,000. And then we have the state's SMART program. And this is the state's solar incentive program, essentially. And it's extremely complex, and I'm not going to talk about all of the different details of it, although I'm happy to take some questions and I'll do the best I can. But the main sort of piece of the SMART program is these things called renewable energy credits, or RECs, sometimes known as. And RECs and renewable energy credits, they're essentially like a certificate that represents the environmental attributes of the energy being produced. And so they're openly traded on the market. And so what that looks like, right, is let's say a company says, we want to source all of our electricity from 100% renewable electricity, right? But, they can't build, a solar project to do that. And so what they'll do is they'll buy these credits, which stimulate the market for solar, right? And they'll offset their electric usage, and they'll claim, we're using 100% renewable electricity. That's how the REC market sort of works. And then finally, we have this tool, it's called net metering. Sometimes you'll hear when people talk about going solar, they'll talk about like the meter going backwards. That's essentially what net metering is. It's the concept that you can sell back excess energy that you produce from your system, like back to the grid, and then you receive sort of an offset for any future consumption you might have or any current consumption that you have on your meter. Okay, so returning back to this graph, I want to just quickly talk about, you can see this, there's a number of actually interesting things about this chart, but I'm going to focus on one specific thing, which is that you can see the yellow here, that represents commercial solar installations in Massachusetts over the last 10 years. And you can see that we had a lot of commercial development, and then it really sort of dropped off. And there's some factors I'm going to be talking about as to why that's the case, but really trying to get that back up and more robust is one of the big focuses of the bill that I'm going to be talking about. Another sort of area that has a lot of potential but hasn't been developed yet are solar canopies. These are like, say, a parking lot, a semi-permanent structure that you erect for the purposes of putting solar on top of it. So you're using this sort of general open space, like that's otherwise not being used, but you're generating solar power. And you can see there's been very little solar canopies installed in Massachusetts in the past 5 years or so. And finally, just a little bit about the jobs and the state of solar jobs, because jobs are extremely important, right? So you can see we have had some drop off in jobs, unfortunately. 2020 obviously was quite low, partly because of the pandemic and slowed economic activity, et cetera. But even with new federal tax credits entering the scene, we still haven't been able to build back up to the peak that we were once at. Okay, so the problem is we're trying to build a lot more solar, right? We're not building quite enough like solar that we need to be building on like small and medium-sized projects on roofs. And this puts, more pressure onto these large sort of utility scale projects, which oftentimes encounter a lot of opposition, sometimes because they're, in order to build them, you have to sort of cut down lots of trees, those sorts of things. And so then the opposition they encounter slows our development of solar. So that's another problem we're facing. And then, you know, as Rep. Owens and Senator Eldridge spoke about, you know, the question and a question of our electricity prices and how we're going to upgrade the grid and get all this electricity online is like a really important conversation and question that we're having right now. And, you know, as we put more electricity on the grid, we do have a problem that we're going to have to upgrade parts of our grid potentially in order to handle that new capacity. But the good news is, like I said, there's a lot of possibilities for solar in Massachusetts that are still really, really untapped. There are many areas that we can develop solar and the question is, how do we incentivize and get ourselves to be developing in those places? So, so this is sort of, okay, so how do we actually do that? Well, so we need to, right, develop as much as we can. But part of doing that is making sure that we have a robust workforce. I mentioned before, we've had a decline. One of the challenges of many of our incentive programs is they've been very start and stop. We've had sort of programs that peter out, and then it takes us a few years to make a new program. And in the meantime, people get laid off. And then, you know, then they have to ramp all back up again. And so we've had this very, like these incentive programs have been really instrumental in shaping our solar markets. And that includes in shaping like the solar job industry. And so we need to be creating like longer term like incentive programs to give you know, companies more certainty and also to give you know, folks more continuous employment. And then finally, you know, as I mentioned with the infrastructure problems, the good news is that solar actually takes some of the strain of electricity off the grid, especially when it's behind the meter, meaning that it's serving like load on site. It's serving electricity on site. So that could be like a mall, say, right, that has solar on top of it, where before any of that solar is going into the grid, the mall is using that energy, right? Anything extra is going into the grid, but it doesn't now need to pull a lot of electricity from the grid. And so that doesn't have to be transported over to the mall now. And so it's offsetting some of the need for upgrading distribution by meeting the need right where it is. And so I should say, we see the solution, which I'll talk about in a sec, as increasing our incentive programs specifically for the built and disturbed environment. And I have a sort of brief definition of what that means because it's technical, and we worked with Mass Audubon to create this definition. But we wanted to specify we need incentives specifically where we want to see solar, and that's the built and disturbed land. And so that's our definition of what it is. And I'm actually not sure how I'm doing on time, but I might come back to this. Okay. So the bill that I mentioned, you know, what does this actually do, and how does it do the things I talked about? So the first thing is that it removes these unnecessary, we have a number of constraints in our incentive programs, and it removes those constraints specifically for the built and disturbed environment. And so it removes some of the phase outs of net metering. There are limits on how much can be net metered. And limits on the size of project that qualifies for net metering and what percentage the project can get back when it sells the electricity back to the grid. And it removes those limits specifically for projects that are in the built and disturbed environment. And it increases incentives, like I mentioned, by setting that 100% payback rate and raising the size of projects that qualify. And then finally, we've heard from a lot of folks that that rooftop solar, one of the big problems people face is roof replacement, that a lot of roofs are not quite near the end of their lives, and so it doesn't really financially make sense to replace them. But once you put solar up on a roof, you're gonna have, it's gonna be really expensive to take the solar down and replace the roof, and so we've got this problem. And so we need to sort of be able to compensate people for replacing their roofs early. And so we also included that in the bill. And this is just some additional benefits around the electric grid, which I was talking about earlier. So, again, if you're serving load on site, and this is on a brownfield, by the way, so a polluted site, right, that's otherwise not being used but can host clean energy projects. So, if you're reducing load right where it is, you're reducing, these moments of peak demand that are often the moments that really drive our electricity prices up, because those are the moments when electricity costs the most, because all these extra generators have to kick in to meet the peak. And so, and it, again, like reducing the need for new distribution infrastructure as well. And I just want to say a really cool thing about solar in the built environment is that job-wise, it's actually a lot better than these really, really big projects. The number of jobs created from these smaller projects are much higher than the jobs created by these larger projects. So that's about it. These are the organizations supporting the bill, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah, thank you. And I think, Joanne, are you all gonna give a presentation?
Thank you for going.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I'd love to open it up to you to come and take the stand.
Appreciate it. Take the stand. Well, thank you. I don't have slides to share, so I try to be a dynamic speaker. My name is Johanna Newman. I'm the acting director of Environment Massachusetts. We're a citizen-based environmental group that works to protect our air, water, and open spaces here in the Commonwealth. And we're part of the Environment America Federation, which is a federation of 30 state-based groups all across the country working to advance a coordinated agenda. So this is my first time presenting to you, so I'm really delighted to be here. And I thought I would start by just very quickly outlining the problem as we see it, talking about the solutions that we have, touching on the unique benefits that rooftop solar in particular brings to our energy system, and then walking through Massachusetts solar potential kind of sector by sector, sharing some of the recent findings of a report we released 2 weeks ago called Rooftop Solar on the Rise, and then sharing some of the policy recommendations. And then I think Jess and I would be happy to take questions. So quickly, in terms of the problem, I'm sure you all are well aware, we are, as a Commonwealth, still too reliant on dirty energy sources. So in 2022, 2/3 of our electricity came from fossil fuels. First and foremost, methane gas, which we know is a very potent global warming pollutant. And those fossil fuels harm our environment at every step of the process, from extraction to transport to combustion to ultimately disposing of the wastes. So that's the problem. The solutions abound. So today in America, we can power our lives with renewable energy more efficiently and more affordably than ever before. And Massachusetts has renewable energy potential in spades. So according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, wind power alone could meet our electricity needs in 2020, 21 times over. Solar power could meet our electricity demand in 2020, 3 times over. So that's assuming we realize the full technical potential, but I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we have the renewable energy resources to meet all of our electricity needs, even under a scenario where we electrify transportation and we electrify. So that's the good news. we have those solutions. And our ability to harness those renewable energy sources is getting better and better and better all the time. So I want to talk briefly about the unique role that rooftop solar plays in that world of abundant renewable energy sources. So Jess touched on this, but rooftop solar is uniquely valuable because it produces energy right where we need it. And in the report that we released a couple of weeks ago, and I have a copy here, and it's also available on our website, we found that if America realized its full rooftop solar potential, we could be 45% of the electricity used in our country from rooftop solar alone. 45%. Massachusetts, if it maximized its rooftop solar potential, could generate 32,000 gigawatt hours of power a year. So it's not enough to meet all of our electricity needs, but it's a lot. And so again, even though it's a relatively small segment, it brings these unique benefits, which I think is a strong case for, in the next 5 years, really leaning in and maximizing rooftop solar. So let me touch quickly on the unique benefits. First, like all renewable energy sources, rooftop solar, if we tap it, reduces our demand. Secondly, rooftop solar eases strain on the grid during periods of peak demand. So on those hot, sunny days when air conditioners are humming, we're really maximizing energy use, that's when solar is at its best. Third, when you couple rooftop solar with energy storage and with microgrids, it has incredible resiliency benefits. So as we face increasingly extreme weather, rooftop solar brings really unique and powerful set of benefits. And for those of you who don't know, recently Green Mountain Power to the north of us in Vermont started a program where they are incentivizing customers to install Tesla bulbs, and that is essentially their backup plan and their reliability plan. So I think we'll be seeing more and more of those kinds of programs roll out, and would encourage folks in Massachusetts to look at that as well. A fourth benefit of rooftop solar is that it mitigates the amount of open space that we need to commit to the clean energy transition. So I live in Western Massachusetts, and I'm sure folks here are experiencing this too. There's a tension, right? Between ramping up renewable energy production and protecting forests and protecting viable farmland. And in rooftop solar on the rise, we crunched some numbers from California, and we found that for every gigawatt of electricity that we get, for every gigawatt of rooftop solar we install, we avert 5,200 acres of utility scale solar from being installed. So we will likely need some utility scale solar to get to 100% renewable energy, but by maximizing solar on the built environment, we can help reduce those tensions. And I think, I live in Amherst, Massachusetts. There's a 70-acre solar array proposed right now that would cut down some forest land. And all of the people who are opposed to the project say, why don't we put it on the Walmart? Natalie, why don't you put it on the walls, right? So in addition to having a lot of potential, rooftop solar also, I think, enjoys tremendous popular support in a way that utility scale solar sometimes doesn't as much. And then last but not least, so rooftop solar actually delivers benefits to the owners of those campuses. Often it's the business owner or the homeowner. And so they actually see the consumer savings as well. So that's the fifth key benefit of rooftop solar. So given all those unique benefits, our thinking is we should be putting solar on as many rooftops and parking lots as possible, as quickly as possible. And so I want to share just some of the key sector by sector potential numbers so that you have a sense of how much power we could get by directing solar to these different places. And I'm going to start with superstores. So again, when you ask people, where should we be putting solar panels? They're like, well, put it on Walmart. That's a no-brainer. And Massachusetts has more than 1,804 big box buildings. That's the malls, it's the superstores, it's the shopping centers. And if we put solar panels on the roofs of those buildings, we could generate 1,430 gigawatt hours of power. That's enough electricity to power 134,000 households. That's roughly the number of households in Boston and Somerville combined. That's just on big box stores. Next, I want to just talk about warehouses. So Massachusetts has more than 7,376 medium and large warehouses. We didn't count the small warehouses in our analysis. And combined, those medium and large warehouses have a combined area of more than 163 million square feet. And that's the 163 million number is according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the amount that's suitable for solar panels. So if we maximized solar on warehouses in the state, we could produce 2,710 gigawatt hours of power. That's enough to power more than 379,000 households. Massachusetts also has a lot of residential rooftop space and a lot of industrial rooftop space. And we have yet to do a comprehensive analysis. I think maybe the state did a comprehensive analysis of the residential potential, but there are a lot of rooftops out there that we can put solar panels. And so I guess I'll stop there on the sector by sector analysis and transition to some of the latest trends that we've seen in terms of rooftop solar growth in Massachusetts. So what's exciting, and we saw these in the graphs that Jess shared, is that rooftop solar is on the rise in Massachusetts. So in 2022, as a Commonwealth, we generated 3,419 gigawatt hours of power from small scale solar in the city. That's enough to power more than 318,000 average households. We ranked 4th in the nation for our 10-year growth curve in terms of small scale solar. And we also ranked 4th in the nation for our total small scale solar capacity. So that's exciting. I mean, we're a relatively small state and, we're behind places like California and Texas and Florida and Arizona. That's exciting. So kudos to that. That being said, as a state, we've only tapped and just barely scratched the surface of our rooftop solar potential. So our analysis found that we have tapped roughly 10.8% of our rooftop solar potential, which means 89.2% is still there. And we should be harnessing that power as quickly as possible. So I'll wrap up by just sharing some of the key policy recommendations that we see that you all can pursue to keep rooftop solar on the rise in Massachusetts. The first is set bold goals. We have seen time and again that when we set goals, we send a signal to the market and we end up hitting those clean energy goals either on time or even ahead of schedule. I was on a rooftop with Governor Deval Patrick when he first laid out what was supposed to be an aspirational rooftop solar goal back in 2020. I think I brought my infant son and he's 11 now. So I think it was 2017. And at the time, Governor Patrick was like, okay, this is aspirational, 1,600 gigawatt or 1,600 megawatts of solar. We hit that goal 3 years ahead of schedule. So setting goals sends the signal, and we strongly support the goal of 10 gigawatts by 2030 and putting in place interim benchmarks to get there between now and then. We need to put in place the policies that are going to help drive us towards that goal. So some of the key policies that we think make sense for Massachusetts to either dig into more or adopt are first streamlining the permitting and the installation process. So right now, in some parts of the state, it can take as long as 30 days to get a common sense basic residential rooftop solar project approved. And the process varies dramatically from one jurisdiction to the other. So if you're in Amherst, you might need to get a piece of paper actually signed and delivered to town hall. In Hadley, they might have some electronics process. In Boston, it might be some other process. And that patchwork approach increases the soft costs for the solar industry. And those costs get passed on to consumers. So in places like Australia and in Europe, where they've automated the permitting process and created a uniform structure across jurisdictions, it is dramatically cheaper to go solar because they haven't been in this kind of cumbersome front end process that includes all kinds of delays. The Department of Energy has built a free for jurisdictions to adopt permitting platform called Solar Act that was developed in partnership between permitting authorities and the solar industry and code officials. California has now mandated all jurisdictions greater than 10,000 people to adopt this automatic permitting platform. And I know here in Massachusetts, you're considering requiring automatic permitting to help reduce some of those delays and soft costs around solar. Definitely encourage, the legislature to keep moving in that direction and just make these like common sense, relatively straightforward installations like residential systems and most commercial systems fast, hassle-free, and affordable. Secondly, we need to streamline the interconnection process. Last April, I traveled to Somerset, Massachusetts, which is the home of Porter and Millworks. They're the largest employer in Somerset. They manufacture windows and doors. And they have a rooftop solar array already that they installed about 5 years ago. But because of increases in production, they bought a few more robots. These robots, by the way, transport doors around the room. But the use of these robots has increased their energy use. And so they're hoping to install more solar on their roof at Porter Millworks. They put in an application to their utility company to build more rooftop solar. And a year later, they still haven't gotten approval, and they didn't know if the interconnection fee was going to be $100 or $200,000. Now, for a small family-owned business, that uncertainty is just totally unsettling. So, we have to get the utility companies to streamline and bring clarity to that interconnection process and speed it up if we actually want to realize our rooftop solar potential. Third, we need to incentivize solar on the built environment. It's exciting, the growth that we've seen, but if we want to address this tension of land use and really work to direct solar to the built environment, it is sometimes building small scale solar is more costly per unit than the utility scale solar, right? It makes sense. It makes sense for a number of reasons that it might be more costly. And so if we actually want to direct solar to the built environment, we should be doing what we can to incentivize it so the business proposition makes sense for solar installers and owners. And then third, we need to allow for non-traditional financing like PACE programs or other partnership mechanisms to make it easier for people to go solar. And then lastly, it's encouraging that Massachusetts has a good net metering program. Net metering is under attack all across the country. And so I just want to encourage the Commonwealth to maintain our net metering program and acknowledge the true value of rooftop solar and what it brings to our electric grid. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for the opportunity and look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Ron and Jess. I think maybe you want to
Great.
stand up here and thank you for your presentations. I want to recognize the House Bill Warren Committee Chair, Mr. Sean Garbley. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for being here. And I see Senator Barrett, very prominent on the Zoom screen. And I am wondering, Senator Barrett, do you have any questions? Because you always have great questions, and obviously you're playing a critical role in climate legislation. Do you have any questions, or just want to check? And I think you're on mute.
We can't hear you, Senator. He does have his hand raised.
Could that be us?
Okay, and it was him. Okay, sorry. Hear from this?
Oh, wait, no.
Can you hear from there? I don't think it's. Sorry for the delay, Senator Barrett. Okay, we'll keep going. I did have a question is, one of the pushbacks on building solar on disturbed lands, or buildings is that it is more expensive. So if you could comment on that, because that is one of the pushbacks against here.
I mean, right, so it might be more expensive per unit.
Yep.
But it also brings these other benefits that I articulated, like
Yep.
avoided transmission costs, avoided leakage in the transmission system, right? I mean, close to, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we use a lot of electricity as a country, simply transporting power
Yeah.
from the place of generation to the place of consumption. With rooftop solar, you don't have that because you're producing the power right where you need it.
Mhm.
And in particular, for things like a Walmart or other superstores, our analysis I want to say it was around 41% of the electricity usage of those buildings could be produced right on their rooftops if we maximize they have refrigeration, they have freezers, they have lighting. So I don't, those, and then there's the avoided land use benefits, so you preserve the forest and you preserve, so I guess I want to say like Econ 101, right, teaches us supply and demand but the externalities have to be factored in and they're real. And so I just think there are these societal benefits associated with rooftop solar that policymakers need to figure into the calculation. And I don't, so those are my thoughts.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think it's that difference between looking at the numbers on a piece of paper and a GIS system and saying, well, you could put solar here, and the difference between that and basing that analysis more on the real externalities that you're going to see when you try to actually install a system in those places that you're looking at and saying, well, on paper, this looks like it will be less expensive. And so factoring those in, I mean, just the local opposition that we've seen specifically to utility scale solar. I think, anybody looking at the cost of a utility scale development should be factoring in just how much longer that project is going to take to get permitted. And any sort of community benefits that they might be asked to pay in response to cutting down a community, a local forest.
Thank you. And then we fixed anything with Senator Barrett? Okay. So sorry, Senator Barrett. I apologize.
Maybe you can call.
Yes, they're on the chat yet.
Yeah.
If you could send it in the chat, Senator Barrett, that would be great.
Yeah, you can submit a question through the chat.
Thumbs up. But while the senators, writing, I know we love carrots, we love to say incentives in this building, right?
Yes.
The sticks are sometimes come a little bit harder. In Watertown, we've got a solar ordinance, and there's a substantial commercial building that is either being built or being renovated. Requires rooftop solar, of course, and a certain amount of solar. For that, I think we were the first community in New England to do that, not to do our part. But is that a model that could work in some of those places where there's, a big box store or something like that? Just, just mandating. If you're gonna spend, $8 billion on a new building, 8.1 to put the solar on.
And those are those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, in California, all new construction is now required to have rooftop solar. And I know Senator Eldridge has sponsored similar legislation here in Massachusetts, and similar legislation pending in Rhode Island. I think, you know, you end up having to balance the slightly higher upfront cost of that building to include, let's say, a $20,000 solar array with the long-term lower operating costs of that building because of that solar, which I think, you know, that's many of the clean energy technologies, right? There's the higher installation costs, but then long-term savings. So, I mean, as far as we're concerned, every rooftop without solar panels is a wasted opportunity. So we love that. And then the question is there public support for that kind of policy? Because I don't think it helps us to get too far out in front of where the public is at on these policies. So.
And the good news is that here in Massachusetts, we now have, thanks to our legislative leadership, we now have what's called specialized stretch code, which is a new stretch code that a new building code that communities all over the state are just beginning to adopt. That actually is part of the requirement of that code is to have new construction be at least solar ready and not have solar on it. And so I think, as that starts to get adopted by communities and becomes more of a norm, I think as we move forward in the future and as public opinion hopefully starts to shift, I think that can be a lot, we could potentially create that as the base stretch, but essentially that it's not something that towns have to just specially adopt. Many towns have already adopted sort of the pullback version, which is the stretch code, and that could just be updated to include that.
And we have the senator's question.
Not yet.
No, okay.
Anybody here have questions? Johanna, Jess? I did have a question is, and Johanna, you raised the issue that I think so many of us, whether legislators, staff, have around, a residence or often a company or nonprofit saying, we put up the solar array, solar panels, and we can't get the connection, so the interconnection challenge. So how is that best addressed in terms of getting utilities to improve the timeline for connection?
I mean, ultimately, the DPU needs to be on this, and the utility companies, I think, for many years dragged their heels on the energy transition, and we're fighting it tooth and nail, rather than saying, well, okay, this is going to be the future, and let's make sure we're planning for it. So I think we do now have regulators making the utility companies kind of acknowledge that, hey, we want more utilities, we want more solar, we want more wind, we need to interconnect it to the grid. So I think that planning process is finally starting to happen. I think it's happening a little bit late. But I think
It's taking action to do that. Okay.
and then I think, yes, so regulators are taking some action in that direction. I think solar installers also are paying attention to, okay, where are there spots where we can interconnect now? So I know in Western Massachusetts, there are a handful of utility scale sites that are in locations where they could be interconnected to the grid. And they just have to work through the local permitting process now, which is taking a long time. But those are places where it's primed to be interconnected. And then I do think that some of the barriers are unnecessary. So think about, Corner Millworks down in Somerset. The idea that they were waiting for a year for interconnection, and they didn't know if it was going to cost $200,000 or nothing to interconnect an additional array is totally untenable. And so I think there are some, one policy that I think could make sense is, the utility companies have 3 months to act on an array. And if they don't engage with it, it's approved. And if they do engage with it, then it starts the process. But to leave installers and potential owners hanging for that long is Imagine if you wanted to buy a box of cereal and I took it here. This is like rooftop solar is the equivalent of brand in our diet. And so we need to make it as easy and affordable as possible to get that into our energy mix.
Yeah, and I do think we need some increased direction to the utilities because it has been an extremely piecemeal approach. It has been very utility driven. And I think there does need, I think the DPP is starting to work on it. So I think there's also some legislative options on the table at the moment to provide more direction for that and to provide one of the big challenges around it is the question of if there are going to be upgrades, how are those upgrades going to be paid for? And, we've been doing it on a project by project basis, which is ridiculous because it means that your interconnection fee could be $100 and $200,000 and you have no idea. And so we need to be doing more comprehensive energy planning. There needs to be more direction.
And the other thing I'll just mention is there's a working group that's been, I know Select Energy, which is the solar installer in Massachusetts based here, has been working with Eversource on a pilot program to have a behind the meter school solar and storage project at a school in central Massachusetts. And, basically Select is arguing this is going to be behind the meter. We promise not to add any load to the grid. And so in that case, interconnection should not be a problem. But again, it's been 18 months of kind of process back and forth with the utility and they're just, it's like they are so hesitant and cautious to the point of paralysis on some of these even behind the meter projects that I think the DPU and the legislature, rooftop solar will be well served if we gave that kick in the pants.
Senator Barrett, I think we've had it for a second.
You guys can't hear me, can you? Oh, you, oh. Well, thanks, Jamie, very much. I just want to, just very briefly, first of all, I want to thank you and Representative Garbely and Representative Owens and everyone else who was there. I want to articulate a modest counter or additional issues to be considered. I'm very interested in rooftop solar, as I know all of you are, and interested in canopy solar as well. For what it's worth, my hometown has been active in both. However, here are the obstacles we've encountered that make me hesitate to assume that rooftop and canopy can do the job for us. I've approached my select board, whose member, I should say, Mark Sandine, is a leading statewide solar advocate, with this request. Tell the state legislature something that it can do to get more of my neighbors to put rooftop solar on. And his answer in the end is nothing. You can create more incentives, but the incentives are already quite rich and you can't compel homeowners to do it. Now we have in fact managed to find a way to compel developers of new construction to put solar on many roofs, but that's new construction only. There is no way to get the vast majority of rooftops covered with solar unless the owners extend themselves. And this is true whether it's commercial, industrial, or residential. I think the additional opportunities there are, of course, genuine, and we have to push them, but they are quite limited in terms of the pace of the additional uptake. The second point I want to raise is that, of course, rooftop solar is in fact under attack across the country in blue states as well as red states. California is the most egregious offender, having adopted recent rules that have solar installers in California announcing that the additional rollout is virtually dead. So we are actually fighting to make sure that incentives for rooftops aren't rolled back here as they are in other blue places. We do not have a way of getting a lot of additional installs on roofs unless the owners, as I say, extend themselves. And my prosperous neighbors in Lexington, who are very climate conscious, are not extending themselves in any significant degree. I do want to just build on the point made by our wonderful presenters and point out that canopy solar per megawatt is quite expensive. You have to build those steel roofs to be hurricane resistant. So if there isn't already a roof over your parking lot or over your landfill, putting one up expressly for the purpose of generating solar is very expensive per megawatt, which is all to say that as much as we ought to prioritize rooftops and prioritize canopies, we're going to have to build a lot of ground mounted solar if we're going to reach our goals. And we have to figure out how to put that solar on the ground where the per megawatt cost is less without taking over areas that should be given over to other uses. The last thing I want to say, and I only want to say it in order to complicate the picture because the picture is complicated, is that almost every instance of ground mounted solar will involve the taking of some trees, because none of these trees are virgin forest. As we all know, there was much more open space in Massachusetts in the 1600s and the 1700s when we were all farmers than there is today. We actually have more tree cover in Massachusetts than we've had in centuries. So when we take some trees down, we're not devastating a place that was once beautifully forested. We're taking down second and third growth trees. Some of them have to go, and I do want to point out that in general, as it turns out in Massachusetts, we've overestimated the carbon sequestration potential of Massachusetts trees. We've had to correct the math. We're now down to estimating the contributions to emissions reductions from sequestration to be almost 50% of what the Baker administration had originally estimated 3 or 4 years ago. So I just want to emphasize that while there are all kinds of reasons for preserving trees, including the fact that they make Massachusetts beautiful, it is not the case that they contribute as much to emissions reduction as the solar fields that could conceivably go up in their place. So this is a complicated topic, wonderful presentation today, but I am very nervous given the anti-solar wave that's now rolling across the country, some of which is coming from the left out of concerns that we're taking down too many trees. I'm very concerned that the combined efforts of the left to check solar, especially in Western Mass, and the right to kill solar is going to result in, well, our killing solar. So I'm quite concerned about our not overcorrecting and doing what California and other states have already commended to do, which is to slow down the deployment of solar quite a lot. So thank you, and I'm sorry I had trouble connecting earlier. I want to thank the co-chairs and I want to thank our presenters.
Thank you very much for being here, Senator Barron. I have a couple of thoughts. I agree with you that we can't compel people to install rooftop solar, right? We don't live in a dictatorship. But we have seen that the greatest indicator that will determine whether a household is going to go solar is whether their neighbor has done it. So in the literature, peer-reviewed literature, there's a documented neighbor effect of how rooftop solar can be contagious. And I think there is an active effort underway on the part of environmental organizations, including Environment Massachusetts, to help leverage that neighbor effect to drive rooftop solar installation. In other words, so that, you know, a homeowner says, gosh, they have solar and they have solar and they have solar. What am I missing out on? They're, you know, and then getting those folks who do own solar to essentially become clean energy ambassadors. So I'm meeting with the president of the Massachusetts Municipal Association this Friday to talk about a coordinated plan that they have to get local energy boards across the state to, you know, essentially drive these peer influencer campaigns, which we know are effective for technologies like rooftop solar, and I imagine can be leveraged for other clean energy technologies like induction stoves and heat pumps, and electric vehicle adoption as well. And then I definitely share your concerns around attacks on rooftop solar from both the left and the right. In California, I think a lot of it is coming from the utility companies, but they are using labor arguments and cost arguments to undercut rooftop solar. There is now a bill introduced in the California legislature that would require the California Public Utilities Commission to acknowledge all the societal benefits of rooftop solar in their net metering calculation, which would force them to go back and reassess the cuts to net metering. But it's certainly not a done deal. And you're right that we've seen installations in that state plummet by 80%. And a lot of companies are going out of business as a result of the changes in policy there this summer.
Well,
Yeah,
I want to, yeah, I'm sorry, go on, yes.
oh, no, you can go ahead.
No, I just want to, I subscribe to everything and I want to encourage you to do that, that norm setting activity. However, I want to point out, and I say this sadly, not happily, that I've had solar on my roof since 2012. I'm very friendly with all my neighbors, and I like to think in a modest way that I exert positive peer influences, but only one. In my subdivision, where many roofs are south-facing and would lend themselves to solar, only one has put in solar following my stellar example. So we do need to be very ingenious about setting up a kind of norm where people expect to have solar. I think it's achievable, but it's not, we can't be glib or facile. It's going to take very hard work and the design of a marketing plan that doesn't exist so far. It's a big deal to try to figure out how to subtly make people think that solar should just be something they extend themselves for. So again, thank you. Not easily done. Trying to do it here, not making as much headway as I like. And I want to, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I want to just acknowledge that I think one of the big problems is cost, right? Like, excuse me. And I think lowering the cost of solar while also maintaining low rates is something that we're going to continue to work on. So thank you, Senator. I know that's also a priority of yours.
Thank you so much, Senator Barrett. Really appreciate it. And thank you to Jess and Johanna. And I think we're probably at the hour of the presentation. So I don't know if anybody has any questions here for Johanna or Jess. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. We'll keep advocating for this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
It's very informative.